Thurman Milner was our black prince when it came to politics in Hartford because of the fact that how he carried himself and how at that groundswell came from the national scene, the civil rights era.
Describe to me what is racial prejudice.
Racial prejudice is dislike some people based on their color, basically. That's racial anyway. Based on their race, ethics. It doesn't have to be color. It could be like Hispanics, could be Italians against Irish, or whatever way you want to put it. But mainly we use in terms of blacks against whites.
So yeah, going back to Nick Carbone's days, Nick was kind of a, he was the power broker. He was the man. In the 70s, especially when he was on the council, if you wanted to get anywhere in politics in Hartford, you had to go visit Nick and then kiss the ring.
Use that as an excuse for not solving these problems. I think we have to go back into our own community, have to go back into our various departments, and we have to set out definite priorities. And this is what I'm attempting to do with other members of council. And we're going to define these priorities. And this means that some sacred cows, maybe like collecting garbage 6 days a week downtown, are going to have to be dropped. It might mean where we have to change priorities, and instead of having a policeman under every traffic light in the downtown area, we might have to put them out of the neighborhood.
He was the guy, and plus, the corporations were solidly behind him. John Filer and all the bishops, they called them the Hartford bishops back then. They circled the wagons and made Hartford go. So that was a very positive thing.
So when Thurman Milner came in, it was a change in terms of an African American who was coming to say that's our term as minority to have this seat of power at that time. So a lot of folks were uncomfortable with that, as most things are when things change. But a lot of minorities, African Americans particularly, were proud of the fact that he was stepping up to it. Some people didn't think it would happen because they're challenging the structure. He's looking against a big machine or how things were established then.
Well, first of all, is a black man. Just the idea that here is a guy who looks like me, who's the first black man we ever had in this city. So whatever it took for folks like me to make Thurman look good, that's what we were going to do. And I think as a mayor, I think he was good for the city. Now, grant you, it wasn't a strong mayor form of government. I think had it been a strong mayor form of government, it would have been it would have been a better place.
He actually encouraged me to think about becoming the state representative for the district. I thought about it for a minute or two and decided that it'd be something that I would like to do. And so I became a candidate, and I ended up winning a Democratic primary by 15 votes and a general election by about 1,500 votes. And that was sort of the beginning of my relationship with Thurman Milner.
three of us, Wilber Smith and Carrie and myself, former state senator Wilber Smith, three of us got involved in the civil rights movement first. And then Wilber decided to run for state senate, and I decided to run for state rep. And then after I told you before, after I stepped down, Carrie filled my seat as state rep, and I ran for mayor. So we just sort of followed in that, and we saw elective office more so as a continuance of our civil rights activities, not so much as politicians. We very, very close and very good friends. And I guess through the civil rights movement, we just stuck together. And then we decided to go elected office, we stuck together and became very close friends. And that's why that Three Musketeers sort of came up as a saying, I guess.
When I think of Wilber Smith, Carrie Perry, and Thurman Milner, I really see them as sort of a team of leaders in the city of Hartford, African-American leaders that said that, we as African-Americans in the city need to embrace our power. The demographics were changing in the city of Hartford. And here were leaders that were challenging the system. Here were leaders that were saying, let's not just go along with what's been done. The Democratic political power says this is how people of color need to interact with us. We'll tell you who to run. We'll tell you how many will run. And basically you had to go to that system and that institution to sort of get permission to run.
When you file a complaint like that, you get a pretty immediate court hearing because time is of the essence. So it was filed in Superior Court, 95 Washington Street. Rich Beater is the attorney representing Thurman in the challenge. I'm sitting what's called second chair. I sat next to Beater in the courtroom and would run back and forth to the library, getting him research as needed. The judge, if I'm not mistaken, was Judge Douglas Wright. And as the proceedings began to unfold, before we really got into evidence, Wright called everybody into his chambers. And people showed what they had, essentially. At that point in time, it was agreed that there would be no trial and that the Atherton crowd would agree with the Milner crowd to hold a new election. And so at that point, a new election was scheduled for October of that year, if I'm not mistaken. And in the new election, again, another primary between these two, Thurman won that handily. And Thurman became the first African-American mayor of Hartford and of any major New England city after that, serving for, I believe, 6 years until 1987.
A nice personal thing about inspiration was that I was at UConn Law School at the time. I didn't finish it, I dropped out, but that was fine. At the time, Judge Wright, who made the decision in terms of letting the election be held again, I was in his class, and I remember the day or two after the announcement, we were in class, waiting because you'd come in, the students come in first, and Judge Wright walks in, and all of a sudden the students started applauding as he came in and sat down. He kind of smiled and he said, "You kind of like that decision, huh, guys?" And that was, I thought that was nice. That was nice to actually see, to be a part of it here at Hartford as a person who voted, but also see the judge who reaffirmed that vote.
In the 81 election, after the primary, it was going to be Thurman Milner with the Democratic nomination, and I had my name in there as a petition candidate, but I was a registered Democrat. And the Republicans nominated Mike McGarry. And there was some effort to try to get the message to Republicans that, you folks are so weak, your party's going down the drain here at Hartford. If you have any hope of doing anything, you're better off if you have Mike not run, don't let him run, and it would just be the two people, Milner and myself, run. And then I could pick up the Republican votes. But they still had dreams of grandeur. Well, I think that he won on various levels. I think his personality is such that I consider him to be mild, not controversial, polite, dignified, And I think that was in his benefit, whereas I think that, you know, I obviously had been aggressive on what I was trying to pursue, and I had a lot of people who were very much in my camp, and a lot of people that I offended.
The mayor's crew would basically talk about issues in the community. All of us were community-based people. We either worked in the community, I was in law enforcement at the time, some of us worked for the state, various places. We would talk about the general concerns that our community would be talking about every week. What were the things that would need to make Hartford go further? And we would deal with those issues. We would try to connect with people that would be helpful. We would talk about many things, from grant writing to how we could improve the city of Hartford as a grassroots community here. And what he inherited was how to mesh the city, how to make everybody, you know, work together in one accord, which is to this day something that's impossible. But I think one of the things that helped him a lot in shaping what the city's needs were was the history that he had, not only with his crew, but growing up and then educating himself outside of our community, coming back to the community. All of us that were part of the crew were not born and raised in Hartford, but had an invested interest in Hartford.
He was hoping that it would change some of the things that would be happening for people of color and also people in the communities, in the black community and the white community, that they could work together and do what was right for all people instead of just a few getting the benefits. That was one of his main concerns. Some people found it hard because he was determined to do things a certain way, and they thought, more politically, they thought that he should do things, but Thurman stood his grounds on what he wanted, and that's what he ran on.
And what do you think, what did he stand his ground on, and what did people want him to do?
Well, they wanted to be a little, what's the word I want to use? A little softer on the, you know, what the community wants and stuff. But Thurman had his thoughts on certain things, and he just would not move from them.
In 1981, it would have been impossible for Thurman to not face kind of a systemic racism and a power structure dominated by whites. And that's part of the barrier that he broke through. And he had to lead as mayor in that environment, in that context, to try to build consensus, to build legitimacy. And that's always an issue when you're the first, building legitimacy, and that's something that he did with the way he carried himself, and and he's nationally known and recognized.
Thurman, Carrie, and Wilber Smith. What did you think of those three as far as their role in the community?
It's bringing a smile to my face because of the three Musketeers, and they were all giants during that period of time, and they all came out of a certain background of civil rights struggle, and that bound them together. And while they were different in some respects to their core, they were all equal in their sense of justice.
Thurman Milner, who has always been a hero of mine. not just because he was the first African-American mayor of Hartford elected in this city, or that he was the first African-American in all of New England, but because of the values that he embodied and the public service that he demonstrated day after day, year after year. And I thought of Thurman Milner when I served on the Judiciary Committee just recently in the confirmation hearings for the first black woman to serve on the United States Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson. Another trailblazer, another person of courage and strength, whom I was proud to support. Thank you, Thurman Milner.
And the panel now. Mayor Milner of Hartford, Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Vice President Mondale, following up on the question just asked by the young lady, youth unemployment, particularly amongst so-called minorities, is on the increase. Yet the Reagan administration replaced CETA with the Job Training Partnership Act, almost cutting the funding in half, and in essence, throwing the baby of progress and opportunity out with the bathwater, by leaving our cities at the mercy of our states who now administer these programs for the few dwindling funds that are left. What do you feel is the federal government's responsibility in providing equal job opportunities to the youth of America, and how would you as president address this critical issue?
Mayor Milner.
Mr. Chairman, I'll try to be brief. I know you have been the forefront of the fights on employment. We have a major problem with the Job Partnership Training Act, the way it is set up and the way the former is set up under the program. I'm from a city with a population of about 137,000. And to make up our SDA, the service delivery area, we had to take in 32 affluent towns in our surrounding area. So based on the 4% unemployment in the state of Connecticut, we're being cut back some 29% of our funds, even though in the city of Hartford, our unemployment is somewhere around 25 to 30% in some areas. We're being penalized because we have run good programs. And is there any way to look at that formula and see if it can be based on a need basis and regional basis rather than lump it in like they're doing now under the 200,000 population?
Thurman and I were good friends. He was in many ways a quiet man, but he knew exactly what he was about. And I was very close to him, and I was close to one of his wives. I admired him because he was a very serious politician. He knew what he wanted to do for the people, and he knew how he was going to do it, and he worked at it. I always was an admirer of Thurman. I always think when I think of Thurman Milner, I think of a gentleman. He was perfect as far as how he took the importance of his position as mayor, how he dedicated himself to his job. Thurman Milner was a bright man, but he was also a very good man.
about a year ago, they thought I was going to die again. Went to the hospital by ambulance, and I was unconscious for a couple of days, but came back again.
Wow. How do you view that? Not just.
I feel good.
Since he was diagnosed with the prostate cancer, almost 30 or more, or 20 or so years ago, he's been doing what he likes to say, hanging in there. When people call him, that's his favorite line. When they ask how you doing, I'm hanging in there. And he's been battling, with the COPD and a little health scare at age 89. And but he's still witty. He still tells his jokes, and he's usually on top of things when he's not too upset about stuff that's not going where he thinks it should go. Other than that, he's still feisty, he's got his tongue, and he's still Uncle Thurman.
First of all, it made me proud that he was in office and there was hope. It kind of reminded me, looking back, was like he was our local Barack Obama. Changed the landscape, inspired people to seek positions that were always close to us, and that anything was possible on a local level, as now we see it is on a national level. But back in those days, local level of mayor was some of the highest positions that black folks could achieve. And it was something that, when he was elected, helped us to feel that the playing field is being leveled.
Thurman's victory was the first time that political and economic power in the city shifted. It shifted away from the south end and the west end, and the north end came to the table. Obviously, I was working up in the north end, and I welcomed that opportunity to at least, we're the fourth poorest section of the country. Our two neighborhoods, 06106, is the poorest neighborhood for almost 4.5 decades. At that time, it was only 3.5 decades. So Thurman's victory was a little bit of hope, but definitely it was a political shift. Thurman opened the door and allowed some of the conversation about the needs of the struggling neighborhoods in the city at City Hall. Thurman had his ear to the ground. The other thing that Thurman did, which really impressed me, was that it put Hartford as part of the black national political scene. Thurman would have not won the election if political leaders like Jesse Jackson Mayor Washington, all those guys who were nationally at the time, parachuted in a sense. And his victory was only possible because also its forces neutralized the normal politics on the ground.
You know, you had mentioned when you first got involved in civil rights, you had gone and you had met Martin Luther King.
Oh yeah.
And what was that experience like?
It was a great experience. I had met him on several occasions after that, but the first time I met him was very interesting because he came up here, because originally he had worked in tobacco up here years ago, and nobody knew about that. But then when he came back, I got the chance to meet him, and I met him along with Jesse Jackson at the same time, and got very involved with both of them during the civil rights movement when they came up this way. Well, I think it was a great experience for me because, you know, I had heard about him and what he was doing, and it's funny because he said he heard about me when he met me. So I felt very grateful and very great that I did get a chance to see him and to meet him and to talk with him from there and on several other occasions after that.
I can envision the ride down there to the South during the Freedom Rides. These people were born before myself. They probably had a lot more knowledge of the South than I did. I grew up in Detroit. My grandparents were from the South. I can imagine that going back down to the South could not have been easy. They knew the threat that it posed, but as I said before, Thurman and other people, Carrie, Saxon, Perry, and Wilber Smith, they had a belief that they needed to proclaim that what was going on in America wasn't correct as it related to black people, so they felt they had to go, regardless of the risk. But I'm quite sure they knew what they were stepping into.
Where would you begin to talk about the problems in the city?
We can do education, that's a problem. We could do housing, that's a problem. We could do police community relations, that's the biggest problem. Because they don't relate to the community they're supposed to be serving.
How could they be serving better?
Get some of them towns out of there, white towns and black towns. See, Joe, I'm not hung up on this black and white thing. I believe in people. But if you're gonna have people working for poor people, then you should have the best. And I don't feel we have them. Our community people are not really aware of that or have that political awareness. And until we can come together as a vehicle and learn that political bit, we're going to stay in trouble. Once we can get out as a group of minority poor people and vote the people that we feel have our interest at heart, we're in trouble. One of the things here in Hartford, our people don't use their right to vote.
I'm Annette Carter, and I was out Thursday night after they had, like, tore up Ball Street. And any car that had over 4 blacks in it, or 3 blacks in it, the cop stopped. This is on Main Street, And I sit there in the corner and watch, and they stopped all the cars. Then I went out Friday night. Thursday night I went out, and We went downtown, they were stopping it. Now, we was all standing on the corner after we came back from the police station and talked to the police. Now, before we went down there, we watched the kids tear up Capon Street. Tear up Capon Street. Police, 7 cruisers just drove through the area. Tore up Capon Street. Nobody threw tear gas in no place. So we drive to Auburn Avenue to get gas. When we get to Auburn Avenue, nobody's tearing up nothing. Nothing. 4 cars, the cops come up, and they start throwing tear gas. Now, they start throwing tear gas in the gas station over there, where the men work on the cars every week, and every day they work on them same cars in that Sunoco station over there. They start throwing tear gas.
Thurman as a person was dedicated to the city of Hartford. Like I said, he gave back. When you look at his life, he went to the military, he served our whole country. Then he came home and he worked in the Department of Welfare as a social worker. And then he got elected and went to the Capitol and to the Senate. And then when he left the Senate, he was elected as mayor. And then after being elected as mayor, and he was there for 6 years, he gave up the seat and Carrie went in. And then he decided that he didn't think they were doing enough. He ran again and got elected to the Senate.
Thurman was a great guy, well-loved man, and handled himself very well. He was a real gentleman. Everybody thought that. People did think he had some physical problems. For a while he did, but he seemed to handle himself well. Of course, he kind of got, I would say, forced out, but other factions came along. He didn't have the strong mayor at all. It was weak mayor at the time, and without 6 votes, 5 or 6 votes on council, very hard to do anything dramatic. Day-to-day stuff seemed to be okay, but to do anything dramatic, any big moves, you really need a majority of council, a supermajority 6. And I don't think he ever had that. The difference is when Mike Peters was on, we had a very conservative agenda, and more of an agenda than anybody, even Perry. Perry was left of center and bragged about it, but we had an agenda, we had the votes, we had the mayor with us. So the things that we were able to do were dramatic compared to most councils.
I think Thurman conducted himself in a way, so because of how he conducted himself, he acquired more and more, I would say, political power. People respected him. He made a point of going around the city, going to every single community group that he could, talking to them about the affairs of the city. He worked very closely with the council. He didn't have a vote on putting together the budget, but when we caucused, the mayor, because he was also a Democrat, was a member of our caucus, and he gave a whole lot of input because his job was full-time as the mayor, and our job was part-time. I think it's fair to say that he managed to get out a lot more than we did.
When I think of Hartford in the 80s, I think of the haves and the have-nots. There was great opportunities if you lived in certain parts of the city. And downtown was thriving at the time. The south end of Hartford was relatively strong. Parts of the west end was doing very, very well. North end needed some help. Educationally, financially, housing was really getting into disrepair, and it needed some attention. And again, in that regard, I think some of the folks in Hartford, including the mayor, Mayor Milner, did a good job in that regard. But as far as his politics, I always thought Thurman as somebody who liked being mayor, liked the part of government. He wasn't really a politician. He didn't have that persona that you would need to go out and meet and greet people. He was relatively quiet, and he basically stayed in his office and did his job, and that was it. But as far as going out to the community and meeting people from all different parts of the city, that wasn't the way he operated, and that's just the way he was.
Comparing the terms of mayors in Hartford is like comparing apples to oranges. There are a lot of factors that go into that. It would be unrealistic to think that you can compare them without dealing with the issue of race. It's unrealistic. I'm a student of Dr. Cornel West. West has a book out written, Race Matters. To think it doesn't matter in this country would not be realistic. And what Thurman Milner was able to do was what he did was he prioritized his own humanity, and he recognized the humanity of other people.
So the way we keep his name alive here at Thurman L. Milner is we have him obviously invite him to all the major events here, but also during attendance explosions like the one today, we have questions that we ask the students, kind of like questionnaires to see if they know who Mayor Milner is and what he is to this community and to this school. He's also a big part of our Black History Month celebration, so that's a great month for the students to learn about his legacy as well. And then we also keep him alive during advisory. There is multiple lessons during advisory where we talk about Thurman L. Milner and also other great Black people in the Hartford area.
What are you proudest of? That's what I wanted to ask you. When you look back on your career, what are you proudest that you were able to accomplish?
I think running for mayor and being elected mayors of the city of Hartford, because at the time there was no African Americans elected. No one thought that I would win because George Athens was very popular and very, a lot of people liked him as a person, even though he may not be doing all the things he should. I thought he should be doing, but he was a very personable person. But me winning that election, I thought was the most important thing that I had done in my career.
The Reverend Colin Bennett spent an awful lot of time here in the city of Hartford. He was one of the first Caribbean person to be elected to the Hartford City Council. And he was a Republican, but even as a Republican, that title was just that.
Yeah, my operative principle has always been that I do not and will not allow anyone to live in a house that I don't want to live in myself. I would like to see the day in this community and in our country when everyone will have an opportunity to live in a very decent environment.
He used his grassroots efforts again because people knew him, they trusted him. So when he said, this is the person that we should all rally behind and we have to do what is necessary to get him elected, people listened to that.
I would say for Carrie Perry, Wilber Smith, and Thurman Milner, I would say they gave us a voice. You know, they gave us a voice in Hartford. We were able to know what was going on at the table. Because sometimes when you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Once you break that wall down, it gives opportunity for other people to be willing to run for the mayor, city council. Because when they started that, more African Americans start running for office, not just the local level, but even at the state level, you know, with Wilber. And Wilber had a big voice. He wanted to be heard, and he was heard. He was a straight shooter. Where Carrie, I would say she was more in the middle, and Thurman was much more conservative. But everyone cannot be the same, because some people can take leadership in more down to earth like Thurman was, and Carrie was in the middle. And then if you want to all hell break out, let Wilber come to the table, because he wasn't playing.
So you met Wilber Smith when he came up from the South.
Yeah, he was 17 years old when he first came up, and I met him then.
And he had said he didn't realize the North had
as many problems as he was facing down there when he came up here.
Well, it couldn't have been as bad as the South.
Not as bad, but he didn't realize we even had a problem.
Still prejudice. Yeah, okay. And so he came up and he was part of your group.
Yeah, Carrie and I became like a group together. And then the three of us got involved in the civil rights movement up here.
Now, when he passed, that must have been a sad time in your life.
Oh, yeah. In fact, that's when I went to his deathbed, that's when he asked me to run for his seat, because he intended to run again. He had stepped down. And that's when I decided I'd run for his seat, which I did. And I only ran one term, because that's what I agreed to him I would do.
That was state rep, or state
senator.
State senator.
It was a very shocking experience for me, because when I went into the Air Force, I went with also a white friend of mine. We both went together, and we both decided to go to town in Alabama. And first thing we were separated by the police. They said, no, you can't do that. And I said, why not? We're friends. He said, no, this is Alabama. And that kind of very, very segregated. So actually, he had to go his way, I had to go my way. And so I just stopped going off base. And he stopped going off base.
Do you remember the first time you heard the N-word? Do you remember the first time?
First time I heard it? not offhand.
No, but you have heard it, that people
Oh,
call
I've heard it as a youngster. I've heard it.
And was it any more accepted as a youngster as compared to today?
No, it was very hurtful, more so than accepted, because my mother, I would say something to her about it, and she would let me know that, and we discussed that sort of stuff in our family. So I was called that, and it was very hurtful.
At what age were you first aware of racial prejudice or discrimination? Can you remember, like, what?
Probably as a youngster, because my mother worked out in West Hartford for white families, and she'd come home and we talk about that stuff, and we discussed that. Even when I was young, there was a racism in existence. I don't think they'll run through the same things that we went through as youngsters, but I think
why not?
They will run into it.
Why won't they go through the same thing?
Because of the changes that were made, during our time.
It was more blatant when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right now, you may have someone call the N-word off and on, but it's not the way it was when I was a youngster. But usually now they just fight.
Mm-hmm. So you heard it more, you mean, as a youngster?
Yeah, because it was something that they would just do.
And it was something that you either had to accept or fight for.
Fight against, yeah. And,
did you ever fist fight against it? Did you ever get into a...
Oh yeah, I've had physical fights in school.
Were you ever afraid? Were you ever scared of racial prejudice?
Not really scared, no. I guess that's why I got involved in the civil rights movement. That sort of took some of that stuff away from me, because...
But I'm thinking about the service. When you went in the service, I'm sure there was a lot of racial prejudice.
Oh yeah.
In service, and I'm sure you were aware of...
It wasn't really scary. It made me more angry than scared.
I think was groundbreaking because he kind of led the way in terms of, particularly for African Americans, and I think that the biggest lament was that he wasn't a strong mayor. It would have been great if Thurman was a strong mayor, but he was strong in that he laid the course for giving African Americans in Hartford hope for a future, and a lot of dynamic things happened. He was very caring, always willing to help somebody. I know he was willing to help me when I ran for mayor. He was exceedingly helpful. He was willing to be the chairman of my quote-unquote transition team that never happened, but he was on board and he was very helpful.
Because I had not dealt with, done bits and pieces with African American lineage, but not a great deal because it was just beginning to come to the forefront at that point. Frankly, it was a neglected area of historical research, and I myself, working at CHS, had not realized the involvement of the black community in things like the Revolutionary War. The whole thing, my whole job from day one was a learning experience.
We got to see that he was still of value. And sometimes when we go into political positions and we move out of those spaces, people don't discard us, but people don't see the need for our proximity the same. And I think that him writing continuously provided that not only he was still a value to the community, but he was a value to the entire Hartford, and we needed to access the wisdom, the understanding, and even to understand how to navigate. I think a lot of the things that he shared also broke down what was happening in City Hall and statewide.
Very dignified man, okay? When, you know, we were colleagues in the State House. I was there, you know, and, you know, with him. And, you know, the House of Representatives in Connecticut, it's like rough and tumble, but he was always above it in a nice way, in a dignified way. You know, always had his jacket and tie on, didn't, you know, sometimes there were fisticuffs, you know, political, that was never him. He was always looking at what are we trying to accomplish, let's get there, let's work with people. And again, he had a very quiet dignity. But the best thing you can do as a mayor is to have the city, bring the city together. And I always thought that, you know, people were proud that he was the mayor because, again, he acted in such a dignified way. I mean, you knew that decisions were being made on the up and up.
Hi, Thurman. Ned Lamont here. As you all know, Thurman was the first popularly elected African-American mayor, not only in Hartford, but in all of New England. He's been a great friend for me, a great friend for the state, and a great friend for kids, especially kids of color, going back generations. I think he was first inspired by Martin Luther King, and that meeting propelled him on to a great life of public service, for which we're so thankful. And I'm thankful that I had a chance to meet Thurman going back almost 20 years now, and that has been an inspiration for me as well. Thurman, here's to you, my friend.
They wanted to know the influence of your mom, how important your mother was in your life, and what she did, what she gave you.
Yeah, she was very important because my father died at 48, leaving 6 of us. And she worked out in West Hartford, doing domestic work, but she made sure we were ready for school, in school, dressed properly, did our homework when we got home, and went to bed on time. But she was very influential, very strong-willed woman that had great respect and love for her.
I guess you really can't replace a friend like that.
Right, because we've known each other, like I said, for years and years and years. It was like me, her, and Wilber, and he went first, and then she went. And
what kind of person was she?
She's a very personal person. She was from a family of quite a big family, but she was very quiet and very active and very involved in the civil rights movement, as I was. We were sort of partners during that time. And she worked very hard, and she was a fighter. She's a civil rights type fighter, and she did the same thing when she became elected official, fought on issues. It didn't make no sense. It still doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know, they just cremated her and buried her. I was very upset about it because, we had been close for so many years, and I would think the first one they would notify would be me that she had passed. And the only time they notified me was she had been cremated. And I said, that didn't make no sense.
And do you ever been to her gravesite? I'm not quite sure.
She doesn't have a gravesite. They just cremated her and still don't know what she did with the ashes. Forty, 50 years ago, the whole integration thing changed. Even here in New England, we had a lot of racial problems and segregated problems because I lived on Roosevelt Street. Even there was a lot of racial problems where I lived. But most people don't understand that. They think New England was one of the most liberal areas of the nation. But there were some problems in the school systems, in the communities, dealing with people in general.
And what do you think black leaders have to be aware of the past? What message would you have for them to remind them?
I think they need to understand the struggles that people went through the past to get where they are today. Because that was what got them, a lot of them thinking that it was normal, that this is just something that, things the way they were. But I don't think a lot of them even looking through their history and understand the fights and the struggles their parents and grandparents went through to get them where they are today. Because I know when I first started off, it was a big fight, trying to get elected. I'm just a quiet type person. I had no intention of getting in politics. I was in the civil rights movement, and from the civil rights movement, that Wilber, Carrie, and I decided to get into politics to make some changes. But I never considered myself a politician.
What do you want to be remembered for? What do you want people to, when they think of you?
Just as Thirman L. Milner.